next up, we have Alicia Detelich of Yale University Libraries presenting Implementing a Custom Reports Plugin. This presentation will walk attendees through the process of implementing a custom reports plugin, and the presentation will include information on the structure of the plugin, how to suppress existing reports, how to write and add new reports, and how to include different types of user-defined parameters. Major benefits and possible workflows that could be supported by a reports plugin will also be discussed. Alicia is a metadata archivist at Yale Library's Manuscripts and Archives unit. Her professional interests center on the use of computational methods in archives and the development of tools to make archival work more effective. Take it away, Alicia.
All right, thank you very much, Jessica, and thanks for everyone who helped organize the event. This is great. So like Jessica said, today I'm going to give a quick overview of the process for implementing a custom reports plugin. I'm going to talk a little bit about plugins and the reports module in general for just a second before I walk you through the process of creating the plugin. I'll finish up by talking a little bit about the benefits that having this kind of plugin can provide. So get my slides going. So ArchivesSpace plugins provide a way for users to override or extend the functionality of the application. So ArchivesSpace makes it super easy to write plugins, which is great, but you also have to be a little bit careful because you're able to do so much. Some of the things that you do can have like unintended consequences in other parts of the app. But fortunately for us, the reporting functionality is relatively self-contained and straightforward. So there's some information on this slide here about plugins sort of in general, since I don't really have time to talk much about them. It includes a few resources that go into much more detail. Setting up a reports plugin, though, is relatively simple, and you can just kind of follow the structure of the one that I'll show you, or you can use one of the examples from the other institutions that I'll link to at the end of the slides. It can also be really helpful to check out the built-in reports and see how they're structured to get some ideas. So the reports module has been part of ArchivesSpace since the beginning, but it wasn't really functional until it was refactored in 2018. So one of the benefits outside of the fact that the reports actually work consistently is that you can pretty easily add new reports, and you can add them using raw SQL rather than the SQL library that Ruby used to use. So this is great for someone like me who is a metadata archivist, and I know a lot about SQL, but I know like barely enough Ruby to get by. So I should note too that the technical documentation states that there are some limitations to keeping the reports in a plugin rather than just directly modifying the reports directory. And that includes sort of a limited ability to create the custom report templates. I personally didn't really feel the need to use those templates. I felt like just dropping in a lot of our like frequently used reports was enough for us to get started. And we also already had kind of like a pre-existing workflow for updating plugins into our hosted instance. So I just kind of wanted to continue working with that sort of existing structure. I also made a few kind of small changes to the reports that I kind of wanted to keep all together. So you'll see that. That's why I kind of thought a plugin would work for us. So like I said, there's some pretty good documentation about how to create the report files and to structure the plugin, but it's definitely easier to understand once you actually see it. So I'm going to move out of the slides into this actual directory. So this is the plugin that I have been working on. It's a pretty simple structure. There's just these two main directories, backend and front end. And so you'll notice that there are like a couple of other things here. You don't actually need them for the plugin to work. It just kind of like, if you don't want to use them, you can get rid of this plugin init file and the gem file. So basically what this is in addition to the custom reports that I've added, I also have a method that lets you export the reports in Excel format. And I also updated a couple little things so that the reports know that there's Excel format available. And then one other thing that I did that you don't necessarily have to do is I modified this reports manager class here to suppress all the existing reports. So basically in the interface, you can't see any of the like built-in reports. You can only see the custom ones that I've added. And I think you could probably also do that within by modifying the reports directory. But since I was managing it all in a plugin, I decided to just kind of put it all here. So that's why, the plugin using the Excel exports requires the Ruby Excel gem, which I am pretty sure is part of the core code gems in 2.8.1 because the Excel bulk importer uses that. But since we are still on 2.7.1, I have this gem file here so that it will install Ruby Excel when you initialize the plugin on the first time that you run it. So basically, just so you know, though, the Excel exports are still in test for us. We have not used these in production, so definitely use them at your own risk if you decide to do that. So anyway, so the back end part is really where most of the fun stuff is. This is where all the stuff that happens behind the scenes is stored, including the queries themselves. And then the front end stuff it more operates on like the translations and things that operates on the staff interface, the text boxes and what have you. So the reports themselves are stored in this backend model directory. And so each report gets its own file, and to add a new one, you basically have to create a new file and add it to this directory. Most of the time, I just duplicate an existing file and use that as the basis for the new report, since most of the Ruby structure is the same across all of the reports. There's a little bit of Ruby that you have to deal with, but for the most part, it's just like a template rather than a whole bunch of code that you have to write yourself. The most labor-intensive part of it is definitely writing the SQL. So each file here is prefixed by the record type that it acts on. So I'm not sure how important that is because you can also have other record types in your query that's not limited to that, but that's kind of just like the basic structure. And so to get started, I'll open up this file here. To get started, you basically have to have this line here where you name your report. And this essentially has to match what your file name is and then what your translation will look like, which I'll show you in a minute. Excuse me. So, and then if you have like parameters that you want to have users be able to input, you will define them in the call to register report here, which is basically you name the parameter, you define the data type, and this is basically just Ruby syntax, and then you give it a little bit of a description. And then you actually initialize those parameters here where you define your variable, and this basically turns this into a string that the query can understand. And if there is no parameter, it just gives you like the current time or date. So basically, so this will just have like the two from the begin date and the end date. This one here will have just an end date. And this will pretty much be the same anytime you want to use like any kind of date functionality. So you can basically just copy and paste that in your own queries. So a lot of the queries, actually, one thing I want to mention before I give you my caveat is if you don't want any parameters, so you will just leave this empty and then you don't use the initialize method here. You just leave it blank and nothing happens. So I do want to mention a little bit of a problem that I had. So a lot of the queries that I use take a call number as input, which is basically just a string that you enter into a text box. But I ran into this problem when trying to use the string as the data type as defined like here. So I will show you my error. So I'm not quite sure what happened here, but basically it essentially couldn't read that there was the report partial there. I tried to add a custom like string file, but that didn't work either. So basically what I ended up doing is, let me show you my directory. What I ended up doing is creating this custom report partial that just basically finds that parameter and has it there. So I think this would pretty much work for any type of string parameter. So what you might just have to do is each time you have a different string parameter, you have to define a new partial. So I know that in earlier versions of the application, this actually worked just using this string. So I'm not sure if something might have changed in newer versions. So I think probably my next step is to submit a ticket, because I know that based from some comments I saw on the listserv not too long ago, there are some other people who had this kind of issue as well. So ideally, this will not be like a permanent thing, but just a caveat to be aware of. So anyway, once you do have your parameters defined here and here, you can actually insert them into your report. And you basically do that using this DB literal syntax. And this DB literal basically prevents SQL injection attacks. So essentially prevents someone from entering an SQL statement into your text box that deletes your whole database, which is, definitely something you don't want. So basically you have this query string here, which is a method, but it basically just contains a regular SQL statement. And then the DB literal in parentheses here will take the variable that you define in this initialize parameter and insert that into the query string. And that is how you kind of get your parameters into that query string. It is also pretty easy to scope your queries to the current repository. So the repository that the person is in when they're actually running your report. And you do that basically the same way. You use this DB literal syntax, and then you use this repo ID variable, which I am fairly sure is defined maybe in the parent class that each report kind of inherits from. So there are a bunch of other kind of options you can set as well. I'm not going to talk about those here, but you can take a look at the documentation or the reports directory of the application to get a better sense of sort of what's available to you. And so once you have the query added, the only thing you really need to do is update your YAML file so that there are translations for each report. And so you basically match the file name of your report and the class name. And then you include a title, like a human readable title, a description, and then this identifier prefix, like I mentioned before. You can also include some translations for your parameters. So for instance, converting the underscored call number to a human readable. And so really that's all you need to kind of get your reports up and running. And then once you have them there, you can pretty much just run them like that, no problem. And there you are. So once this runs, I'll kind of show you the output real quick. And it should only take a second, hopefully. Download the report. And there you are. You have your containers. All right. Really once you have it all set up and you have a process worked out for adding your new reports, it's really useful for a lot of different things. Here are just a few examples of reports that I put together, both for my department and generally for other units of the library. There's really like a pretty unlimited number of questions that you can answer with this kind of report. Most of the questions that you have about your data can be answered with SQL. One of the nice things too, I think, is that it makes it super easy for the non-technical staff among us, administrators, et cetera, to run reports that they need on a regular basis without having kind of to ask for them to be run. It's empowering for those folks, and it takes some pressure off your tech services folks as well. In addition to kind of these general reporting functions, more recently, we have been integrating some of this reports functionality into our departmental workflows. So one way we have been doing this is through supporting Born Digital Processing. So our Born Digital Archives Working Group recently issued guidelines for describing Born Digital materials at the file level. So we have this report, which basically retrieves all existing file level minimum data, and then our processors download it. modify it as needed, and then we run a script either to create new archival objects or to update existing objects kind of based on the data in that report. And then, in general, this kind of workflow can be extended to all kinds of bulk updates. And this is especially useful for people who don't actually have direct access to their database. So my general workflow for bulk updates is to query the database, get your URIs, get your data, make changes as needed, and then put that back into the ArchivesSpace through the API. And so this really kind of facilitates that process. One final way that we have kind of used this in our department is also fulfilling copy orders for digitized materials. So over the last year, I added a whole bunch of links to Preservica digital files to our ArchivesSpace digital object records. And then I have a query that basically returns all of the digital files for one or more collections. And then upon receiving a request, public services staff runs this report, marks files that should be downloaded, and then sent to the patron. And then a number of scripts run, which uses that spreadsheet to download the files from Preservica, package them up, upload them to Box, and then they're ready to send to the patron. And this has made this process so much easier and has really limited the amount of intervention that people actually need to be involved in it, basically. So that's basically all I have. I know it's very quick. Here are a few other examples of reports plugins that other folks have put together. Here's a link to an old presentation I gave a couple years ago at ArchivesSpace Member Forum about SQL in general. And here is my contact information if you have any questions.
All right, thank you, Alicia. We did have a request if you could drop any links that you have to your technical documentation or anything into the chat whenever you get a chance. So once your Q&A is over, if you'd be willing to drop those into the chat. And again, we'll be sure to include everyone's slides with their recordings on the wiki. So any embedded links or anything that you see in people's slides will be available later as well. Could you please repeat what the Excel export is for? What is being exported?
Sure. So it just exports the report in Excel format. So the built-in reports are just basically they out of the box you get CSV, JSON, RTF, a couple others, I think, HTML. This just exports it in Excel SX format. And it's just the report spreadsheet, basically.
Thanks. Are the Yale reports available to anyone for implementation as a plugin?
Oh yeah, definitely. So here is a link to the GitHub where all these reports are stored. There are a couple that are sort of Yale specific, but they can really easily be generalized. And I tried to make them as general as possible, especially for this demo. So yeah, you can definitely go ahead and use them.
Thanks, sounds good. All right, we've got 2 more questions in the chat in 2 minutes. So we're going to answer these 2 questions. Anything else that pops up? Alicia, if you're able to type your answer, that would be great. Do you recommend any resources for learning SQL to create these custom reports?
Yeah, so that's a complicated, difficult question. I have some links I can maybe put together for you. Maybe if you contact me, I'd be happy to send something to you for sure.
Thanks. Can you take the data grab from SQL and use Ruby to do more with the data? For instance, checking URLs for 404 errors.
Yeah, so I don't know that much Ruby. I don't know exactly, if you can do something sort of natively inside the interface. Typically what I've done is use the SQL export and then, process that with Python because I'm much more comfortable with that. I mean, if you're comfortable with Ruby, you might be able to write in more processing as well. But yeah, the short answer is the exports from the reports are very amenable to bulk operations later on.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. All right. Well, thank you, Alicia. That was great. Custom reports, always an exciting topic. So I appreciate your willingness to present on that at the forum. We're going to go ahead and move along to our last presentation.